Religion advises us to treasure children. Most of us know, for example, Jesus' exhortation, "Suffer the children and forbid them not to come unto me, for such is the kingdom of heaven." So, like me, some of you have raised your own children already. But in many ways, all children are our children. All children reap the blessings and the difficulties that our lives have created for them. So, I want to tell you a story. When he was 5 years old, Barawani Ndumi's family was brutally taken from him. He lived in the Republic of Congo, where there was bitter warfare between the government and the rebels. And rebels overran his village, and they forced him and his family into their house, and then they burned it. And while his family was burning, he was the only one able to escape. He eventually left the country and ended up in a refugee camp in Tanzania, where he lived most of his life. He's now 16. He later said that life of a child in a refugee camp is hard and difficult. There are shortages everywhere, but the worst thing is growing up without a future. When he was 9 years old, he learned that there is an international program to recognize that children have rights, and he began to speak out, becoming active in the camp's children's parliament. And he started a radio show called Sisi Kwa Sisi, which means children for children. And he and other young people report on the conditions of refugee children throughout the world. And they remind other children about their rights and make sure that they know that they have rights. The show is heard in hundreds of countries, and it's reunited many children with their families. And he said, "By defending my rights, I'm working on my future. I tell all the children here that they must do the same. Empowerment is more important than food. Making your voice heard is a true necessity." So Barawani had been recognized by the Kids' Rights Foundation, which is a global nonprofit that works with children to protect their rights and to help them reach their potential through the International Peace Prize Project Fund and some other projects and foundations. And so at the refugee camp where he lives, the foundation has helped create a library, a computer center, and to train teachers and community members to help children process the traumas that they face. In 2015, he was invited to speak at the Global Forum on Youth, Peace, and Security in Jordan. He talked about the plight of refugee children, and that resulted in the Haman Youth Declaration, which led to the first resolution ever to focus on the plight of youth in war-torn countries. He also helped create the International Criminal Court's policy on children, which enables the court to prosecute war crimes against young people. So when I was a kid, I heard about things like the Holocaust and the Dust Bowl and other catastrophes from the recent past, and I was disturbed by these things. But I was reassured by the adults around me that I'd never face anything like this, because I live in America, and Americans are the good guys. And the world remembers these horrible situations and learns from them. And now I sometimes find myself talking to college students and feeling this urge to apologize because we didn't do enough to make sure that those lessons were truly learned and followed. But fortunately, the situation is not all dire. This time of year, being a college chaplain, it's a really good thing. There's a lot of awards ceremonies and banquets and things like that at Stetson where we recognize the amazing work that's done by our students. In fact, I attended one last night from our Multicultural Student Council, and I got to hear advisors and faculty members talking about this incredible work that's being done by our students to save the world. And that left me feeling more optimistic. In Buddhism, we talk about blessings, but blessings are not something that are bestowed upon us from above. They're the results of our good actions. We make new blessings every day, every time we do the right thing, a charitable thing, a wise thing, a compassionate thing. So I want to share with you a few stories about the blessings that are being created by young people who not only inhabit the future, but are shaping it. You may know the name David Hogg, Emma Gonzalez, Jacqueline Foran, and Matt Deach. They are practically your neighbors. They grew up in Parkland. A year ago or so, at age 17, David was interviewing his classmates while they hid in a closet from a gunman at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. And afterward, he and his classmates founded March for Our Lives. They first organized national school walkouts to protest government inaction on gun violence. They continued to fight nonstop to vote out NRA-backed lawmakers, traveling all over the country to rallies and promoting a platform to reduce access to high-capacity guns, to strengthen laws that can keep guns away from those likely to commit violence, and to fund research into the issue. So in Florida, you probably know, their efforts motivated the passage of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act, which is a real mouthful. It was the first gun restrictions legislation in this state in 2 decades. And so far, 25 other states have passed some form of gun violence legislation consistent with the goals of those people. They received the International Children's Peace Prize in Cape Town, South Africa. Desmond Tutu presented it. He said that he considered their movement to be one of the most significant instances of youth-led activism in recent history. So their work to alleviate gun violence and the way they did it has inspired other young people to take action on some other important issues. Greta Thunberg, for example, she's a 16-year-old Swedish environmental activist. And so as important an issue as gun violence is, climate change is perhaps the most critical problem faced by the youth of our world right now. The environmental and economic impact of climate change lies at the root of the refugee crises, hunger, poverty, and violence in many regions, and it's getting worse. So Thunberg recognized this, and she was frustrated with the inactivity of world leaders. And so in August, she stopped attending school and began a protest outside the Swedish parliament to draw political attention to the issue. Her tactic was inspired by the Parkland strikes, and has since been employed by children in over 100 countries. Last week, she took a train ride across Europe to address the British Parliament. And she said, around the year 2030, 10 years, 252 days, and 10 hours from now, we will be in a position where we have set off an irreversible chain reaction beyond human control that will most likely lead to the end of civilization. She said, you don't listen to the science because you're only interested in solutions that will enable you to carry on like before. And those answers don't exist anymore because you did not act in time. So that's pretty courageous to stand up in front of Parliament and say it's fought like that. Climate change and other environmental issues also encouraged 8-year-old Kekeshu Basu to motivate people in the United Arab Emirates to plant trees and recycle waste. Every year, more than 3 million children under age 5 die from environmental causes. Floods, droughts, and hurricanes exacerbated by climate change destroy infrastructure, food, water, and housing. And so Kekeshan realized that to protect children and their rights, we have to protect the planet. And so at age 11, she was invited to address the Tunza Children and Youth Conference in Indonesia. And the following year, she became the youngest delegate to address the UN Conference on Sustainable Development. She's since founded an organization called Green Hope, which works for a sustainable future. And besides organizing tree planting campaigns, Green Hope does waste recycling efforts, beach and mangrove cleanups, and hosts environmental academies and conferences. So war is also a major threat to children. Abraham Kita was born during Liberia's brutal civil war, and his father, a driver for a humanitarian organization, was killed in an ambush when he was only 5 years old. He and his mother lived in extreme poverty and in a slum in Monrovia. The Civil War ended in 2003, but it left deep scars in society, a situation of poverty and lawlessness. When Kita was just 9 years old, he was moved to speak out against the murder of a 13-year-old girl in his community. And he took part in a peaceful protest demanding that the perpetrators, who were her foster parents, were brought to trial.
Wow.
He was invited to join the Liberian Children's Parliament, where he organized marches and called on the Liberian government to respect children's rights. And because of his efforts, the Children's Act was signed into law in 2012. Neha Gupta is a very interesting example of what can happen when a child is moved to help other children and organizes other children to accomplish this. She's a U.S. citizen, but she was born in New Zealand to Indian parents, so she's already got a pretty broad worldview. In 2005, she visited her grandparents in India, and while she was there, she went to a birthday celebration for children at the local orphanage. And she realized while she was there that her new friends in the orphanage had no chance for an education, and that they faced malnutrition and disease and lacked love and support. The situation made such an impression on her that when she went back to her home in the suburbs of Philadelphia, she decided she would do something. She enlisted a bunch of friends, and they started going door to door to collect toys and other castaway goods to have a big garage sale. The sale brought in around $800 to donate to the orphans. And so she was very encouraged by this, and so she and her friends continued to raise funds. And the next year she went back to India with $5,000 to fund a library, food, clothes, and blankets for the orphanage. She was 6 years old. In 2009, at age 9, she founded Empower Orphans, a nonprofit that sponsors the education of individual children with food, clothing, health care, and medical supplies. And it has funded libraries, computer labs, and other resources at schools in India. But she realized that there were a lot of American children that also desperately needed help. And so she started a chapter of Empower Orphans at Penn State. What's amazing about this is that everything that she's done has been carried out by children, for children. So through her efforts, young people in the US, India, Singapore, and Australia have become social actors. Through her organization, they're putting together social projects of their own. Malala, another young woman, maybe one of the most courageous people living today. Malala is from Mingora in northern Pakistan, where girls don't usually go to school. But she loves learning, and with her father's encouragement, she went to school to continue her education, even after the Taliban took over parts of Pakistan in 2007. So under the Taliban, television, music, and movies were controlled, women couldn't go to the market, and girls weren't allowed in schools. In 2008, when she was 11, the Taliban blew up 150 schools. In response, she took part in a march organized by her school and ended up appearing on a BBC talk show in Urdu, where she spoke out saying, "How dare the Taliban take away my basic right to an education?" And she started writing a blog for the BBC about her passion for learning and about the oppressions of the Taliban. By 2011, she was a global figure for her bravery and was invited to speak around the world on behalf of girls' rights to an education. This all changed in October 2012 when Taliban school gunmen boarded her school bus, identified her, and shot her in the head. Miraculously, she survived, and she was brought to the United Kingdom, where she recovered from the attack and stayed there with her family. It really was an amazing thing. There was a specialist in that sort of stuff that was British who happened to be there when that happened. So she ended up recovering, and in 2013 was awarded the International Children's Peace Prize and given a standing ovation in The Hague. And then she said, after the attack, I had two options. I could stop, or I could continue my mission. I decided to continue. That's the only way I could see it. Even death would support my mission, and I mustn't be afraid anymore. So on her 16th birthday, she spoke to the UN. In 2014, at the age of 17, she became the youngest person to ever receive the Nobel Peace Prize. And she and her father set up the Malala Fund to bring education to children around the world. So when I was in New Mexico a couple of months ago for the University Chaplains Conference, there was a talk by Valerie Carr. She was a Sikh who grew up in California. And she was 20 and in college studying film when a family friend became a victim of the first hate crime after September 11. And her response was to make a documentary called Divided We Fall, and ultimately to found the Revolutionary Love Project, which aims to make love an ethic in public life. And so at this conference where I heard her speak, she was talking about purposeful work. And she made an interesting comment that stuck with me. She said, success should not be measured by outcomes, but by faithfulness to your values. So we all saw the fire, I'm sure, that consumed Notre Dame. And I think it's helpful to realize that people who started construction of these ancient European cathedrals never expected to see them finished in their lifetime. But they laid stone after stone anyway. It took a century to build that cathedral, and it continued to evolve since then, to grow and be rebuilt several times after fires and desecrations. The outcomes changed, but the work was always guided by faithfulness to the values. So as I've said, there are many young people out there working every day to create new blessings. Not really sure of what the outcomes are going to be often, but guided by their values, faithful to their values. So the fact that they're out there doesn't let us off the hook. Whatever we can do to help them in their work, to create an environment conducive to their work, will compound those blessings. So I usually end Dharma talks by saying something like, thank you for your attention. You know, I've said before that our experience of life, and whether it's good or bad, has a great deal to do with where we put our attention. The lives of children all over the world will be greatly affected tomorrow by how we use our attention today. If we pay attention skillfully, I think we can leave the world better than we found it. So thank you for your attention. God bless everyone.